In many ways, the movie industry chaos of 2023 was more notable than the actual films released this year, which I know is a weird thing to lead off a top 10 list with, but I don't think there's anything in, say, Oppenheimer as dramatic as Ron Perlman ominously threatening greedy studio executives over Instagram.
Listen to me, motherfucker. There's a lot of ways to lose your house. Some of it is financial, some of it is karma, and some of it is just figuring out who the fuck said that. And we know who said that. And where he fucking lives. There's a lot of ways to lose your house.
The studios at last face their reckoning. Their Silicon Valley paymasters getting a stark reminder that Hollywood is a union town, and that there's a hard limit to how much they can marginalize the labor that makes their profits possible. The strikes played out against the backdrop of both the streaming and superhero bubbles simultaneously bursting, creating an entropy not seen since the studio collapse of the late 60s. Hollywood is fumbling around in the dark, trying to find the next big thing. And the biggest trend this year? Origin stories about your favorite consumer brands, fresh off the shelves at Walmart. Yeah, the outlook's not looking too pretty for the movie business. But you can't quite call a year where we got new work from Martin Scorsese, Christopher Nolan, and Hayao freaking Miyazaki a bad year, especially when you find movies that are even better than those aforementioned films. For all the doom and gloom about corporate consolidation, people still haven't stopped making good cinema, from both inside and outside of the Hollywood system. So without further rambling, here are my favorite films of 2023. Note, this video reflects my opinions as of January 7th, 2024. While I absolutely love all 10 of these movies, there are still quite a few acclaimed releases from 23 that I have not seen. There is a letterboxd list in the description that will reflect any future changes. First, here are some honorable mentions that got lost in the shuffle of the year and deserve more love. Knock at the Cabin. When people talk about Dave Bautista, the actor, especially when comparing him to The Rock, they oftentimes emphasize his range and versatility, which, quite frankly, I think are overstated. Bautista's true strength, and what Dwayne Johnson lacks, is conviction and vulnerability. In many ways, he may be the perfect muse for M. Night Shyamalan, able to put real emotional weight behind the odd verbiage and cadence of the filmmaker's dialogue. Bautista is the stabilizing force in what is essentially a secular Left Behind, one of the most controversial M. Night endings, one that I respect, even though I personally disagree with it on a philosophical level. But it can't be denied how viscerally M. Night captures the post-pandemic zeitgeist in all its contradictions. Screecher's Reach. By rule, I leave short films off my top 10 list, but damned if this slice of folk horror set in the Star Wars universe, made by the legendary animation house Cartoon Saloon, isn't my favorite piece of media, not just movies, from 2023. Equal parts spooky and subversive, weaving the richness of both Irish mythology and Star Wars lore into something wholly unique to the franchise. I'm already working on an entire video essay about this, so I will say no more. It's actually best to go into it totally cold. Check it out along with the other brilliant Star Wars Vision shorts on Disney+. They cloned Tyrone, a sci-fi hood comedy that liberally borrows from Sorry to Bother You, Us, and even Undercover Brother, and is still just as satirically sharp and funny as those movies. It's the pure muscle of the cast that gives They Clone Tyrone its own distinct verve. Jamie Foxx improvs some of the biggest laughs as a movie nerd pimp. John Boyega provides a captivating dramatic grounding for the titular gangbanger, and the beautiful Teyonah Parris is the perfect fulcrum of the two tones at the middle. Boyega had the perfect response to people wanting him to be cast as the new Kang the Conqueror, and honestly, I'd much rather see him in a weirdo film like this every year than get locked into yet another franchise that will underutilize his talents. 65. A special award for the most overhated film of 2023. 65 is a refreshing throwback to the non-stop pulpy thrills of The Lost World, King Kong, and 1 million years BC. Humans are an alien virus in the Cretaceous period, and beasts and critters lie in every corner to relentlessly snuff out the infection, and each other in countless brutal ways. We've overthought dinosaur movies for the past 30 years, thinking they had to be a metaphor for something: conservation, capitalism, colonialism, Vietnam. Sometimes you just need to sit back and enjoy the simple pleasures of Adam Driver blasting a T-Rex in the face with an assault rifle. And now, here's my top 10. Number 10, The Holdovers. The best Christmas movies are the ones that revel in the collective misery the holiday season brings, and you can add The Holdovers to that canon. It's a meticulously crafted pastiche to the comedy films of 1970 that ironically feels more immediate to the current moment than anything else on this list. How does one cope in a time of overwhelming injustice and social alienation? For the trio of characters trapped in a prep school purgatory over the winter break, it's about realizing you're never truly alone in your loneliness. The despair you feel is something everyone else is also feeling, and that there's a certain healing camaraderie that can be formed around it, something of a running theme of all my favorite post-pandemic movies. The Holdovers is director Alexander Payne's most hopeful and earnest film, and it plays like the complete inverse of his breakout hit Election. Quite fitting that in the year where women finally discovered that men think about the Roman Empire at least once a day, we get a movie about the patron saint of that particular type of guy. Number 9, Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. Hey, I kinda like the cliffhanger ending, and I still say that it's probably gonna be the Luke, I am your father moment for a whole new generation. It's the payoff that loops the story back down to the intimate family drama that drew me into Miles' story in the first place. The first hour is entirely about the everyday inner lives of the characters in these lushly illustrated, half-mundane worlds. And honestly, it made me yearn for a film with that same inventive pop art collage aesthetic that instead dials the scope down to be a more friendly neighborhood Spider-Man kind of story. The personal stakes largely get lost in the multiversal sound and fury of a meandering and overcharged middle act. Even these movies can't escape the general fatigue I feel for comic book multiverses. Still, this is a staggering high water mark for animation, and I'm primed for the finale of this trilogy. Just hope that they treat the animators a little better this time. Number 8. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem. Why yes, I do like this film more than Across the Spiderverse, and The Boy and the Heron for that matter. I'll put it this way, the Spiderverse films are like the gifted prep student who was the top of his class one year and tries super hard to maintain that level of perfection to an almost exhausting degree. Meanwhile, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem is the gross, weird kid in the corner of the class, practicing ninjutsu moves he learned from a Michael Dudikoff movie, and singing to himself the He-Man cover of Four Non-Blondes' What's Up. He smells a bit off, but if you're being completely honest with yourself, he's a bit more fun and interesting to hang around with than the prep kid. I still haven't come to terms that all our great filmmakers will have to play the IP game, but to Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg's credit, even with the PG rating, they still managed to make something just as gleefully grotesque and offbeat as their R-rated classics like Superbad and This Is the End. I'd always prefer them to make original movies, but this is about as idiosyncratic as a piece of franchise filmmaking can get. Number 7. Furies. Furies is a Vietnamese action movie that grabs you by the throat right out of the gate and never loosens its grip. And not in the fun, fist-pumping way like its neon-drenched American contemporaries. The comp here is the female prisoner Scorpion series, starring Meiko Kaji, unflinching and queasy in its depiction of sexual violence, which makes the violence doled out by the titular vigilantes in return all the more cathartic. Yet true to the spirit of 70s exploitation, their righteous, feminine rage is never presented along simple moral lines. This isn't a good for her kind of movie. Every action scene further re-traumatizes the Furies, and the question of to what self-destructive end their quest for vengeance will lead them to drives a surprisingly compelling third act. Director Veronica Nyo Thon Van is one of those international movie stars that a lot of people, including myself, have been clamoring to have more substantial roles stateside. But honestly, now I'd much rather see her make more inventively whip-ass movies like Furies, instead of co-starring in whatever forgettable sludge Ryan Reynolds or Chris Evans is putting out on streaming. Going into 2023, it was hard to imagine any action movie topping John Wick 4, but there is something to be said about a film so efficient at being both mean and lean. Number 6. The Iron Claw. The emotional climax of The Iron Claw uses a specific melodramatic trope that's one of the most unbelievably cheesy and manipulative versions of it that I've ever seen, and the movie earns every single beat of it. Director Sean Durkin tells the tragedy of the Von Erich wrestling family through empty spaces. The first act is a hangout film with these super charming, super lovable, meaty bros, where there's hardly a moment where all 4 of them aren't in the same scene together. Then each successive tragedy is emphasized by that emptiness. A set table with no one sitting down, the reveal of a lost limb after an off-screen motorcycle accident, a mourner's dress laid out flat on a bed. During the inevitable fall that comes with this kind of story, the brothers are almost always separated by physical distance, by a phone line, by different wrestling promotions, and ultimately by death. However, in the end, the movie refuses to define the Von Erichs solely by pain and loss, instead choosing an image of brotherhood as their lasting legacy. A crowd pleaser for sure, but like the next entry on this list, if the craft is good enough, you earn a license to be a little cheesy. Also, just give Zac Efron all the accolades, the kind of true powerhouse performance I've waited 15 years for him to give. Number 5. Godzilla Minus One. When I walked out of this stripped-down pseudo-remake of the 1954 Godzilla, a 12-year-old boy turned to his dad and said, "Wow, that was different. Godzilla was the bad guy in this one." Sign of the times, I suppose, but also describes why Godzilla Minus One comes at a perfect moment for the franchise. No monster-on-monster battle royale, this is a classically drawn kaiju film that reminds us that Godzilla is fucking scary. The requisite stomping of Tokyo is truly apocalyptic, though no more harrowing than in the empty silence of the immediate aftermath. The main twist on the formula is that this story is also a war melodrama, and a damn good one too that cribs from the best, namely Dunkirk and Independence Day, even as it gingerly tiptoes around the broader scope of Japan's involvement in World War II. On one hand, it is a movie in which former Japanese soldiers reclaim a lost glory that was denied to them by their country's defeat in World War II. But also the text of the film explicitly rejects the martyrdom of the wartime kamikaze in favor of a martial philosophy that values life. Film commentator Vice Victus hit the nail on the head when he compared the movie to Guy Ritchie's post-Afghanistan actioneer, The Covenant, a film that tapped into America's desire to see at least one clean victory out of a morally fraught conflict. I suppose, in Godzilla Minus One's case, it's sinking a 150-foot tall metaphor for both nuclear fears and imperial guilt to the bottom of the ocean. Number 4. Huesera. The most obvious comparison for this Mexican horror film is Julia Ducournau's Titan from a couple years ago. It's a story about a pregnant queer woman who is crushed under the pressures of gendered expectations and undergoes extreme body dysmorphia. And like Titan, the actual body horror in Huesera is kind of secondary to the internal drama of its main character, which might disappoint genre fans looking for pure thrills, but honestly, you could take out the Bonitis demon, and this would still be one of the scariest films of the year. Huesera articulates pregnancy fears that are specific to the Mexican culture, not necessarily the physical or financial toll of bringing a child to term, but of familial and religious guilt, slowly stripping a woman of her agency and identity in order to cram her into a traditional, domesticated mold. Naturally, that mold is modeled after the Virgin of Guadalupe herself, an unattainable maternal ideal that literally towers over the protagonist in the opening scene and quietly haunts her throughout the film. Director Michel Garza Cervera isolates Valeria in a suffocating, shallow depth of field, which amplifies the phantasmic presence of lead actress Natalia Solian. She instantly gives this character a rounded shape out of some rather sparsely written dialogue. Perhaps my favorite performance of the year, if only for how she does so much with so few words. The traditional scares are still there. The monsters are very Blumhouse, i.e. faceless entities, with jittery snapping limbs and head movements. Though there is a degree of subtlety in how they move in and out of focus that add to the semi-lucid purgatorial vibe that Huesera is going for here. That subtlety kinda goes out the window in a final act that is orgiastic in almost the literal sense of the word. But I mean, how else are you gonna end a movie about repressed carnal fears and desires? Number 3. A Haunting in Venice. Probably the most chaotic choice on this list, but damn it, I love every loud choice Kenneth Branagh makes, both as an actor and a director. The third entry in the Hercule Poirot trilogy is a rollicking gothic whodunit, featuring all his usual stylistic flares, heightened soundscapes, cheeky match cuts, showy, disorienting camera angles, along with some new tricks, namely a hallucinogenic GoPro sequence. Boy, I can't wait until Ken learns how to use drone cameras. The 1947 post-war setting and the plague-time tale at the heart of the titular haunting places the film firmly in the post-COVID milieu. The menagerie of suspects is made up of doctors, nurses, caretakers, and first responders, haunted by the lives they couldn't save, while Poirot's wartime PTSD is triggered by the death that seemingly follows him everywhere. The empathetic groundwork Branagh laid for the Poirot character in the previous two movies gets a real satisfying and poignant payoff here that helps mask the strained plausibility of the murder itself. But I don't go into a Kenneth Branagh film for airtight plots. Love him or hate him, he remains our most extra auteur. Number 2. Killers of the Flower Moon. In many ways, we've become desensitized to gun violence, both in real life and in movies. Yet my entire theater collectively gasped at the depictions of the real-life Osage murders. Sudden, quick, unceremonious. Then Scorsese twists the knife even further by revealing the assailants to be a bunch of slack-jawed dullards under the command of a truly vile wannabe patrician. Marty made another idiot criminal movie, but this time, aside from a handful of tension-relieving moments of black humor, there's no comedy to soften the blow of the actual injustice and evil at the core of the story. You have to look at it in its falsely genteel, crooked face. Even the final scenes are fascinatingly contradictory, as Scorsese clearly feels weird about having to package the tragedy of the Osage murders into a 3.5-hour-long mass-market crime epic, told primarily from the point of view of the white murderers. On one hand, I understand how an 80-year-old Italian-American from New York City couldn't fully capture the native perspective. That's why Marty's cameo on the hokey, monochromatic radio drama is juxtaposed with the vibrant tapestry of the current-day Osage. But the parts of the story that are centered around Molly and the Osage, including that breathtaking final shot, are so captivatingly told by Scorsese that I inevitably yearn for more of those scenes. Perhaps in due time we'll get that Native American epic directed by an indigenous filmmaker. But as it stands, Killers of the Flower Moon is another Scorsese classic, his best film in over a decade. Number 1. Asteroid City. The story is structurally incomplete, and the form of the film constantly reminds the audience of the artifice of the media in which it's set. And yet, Asteroid City is one of Wes Anderson's most emotionally affecting movies. An absolute magic trick. This past year saw countless atrocious AI facsimiles of Wes Anderson. These artless algorithms, or rather the grifters that push them, only understand him as a series of prefab aesthetic fixations, when the real-life Anderson is constantly evolving and experimenting as a filmmaker. He builds Asteroid City on a latticework of framing devices that weave in and out of each other in a way that's more than showy narrative sleight of hand. It's about the complex web of relationships between the artist, the art, the performers, the audience, and even the medium itself. The way Augie Steenbeck can only express his deepest emotions and insecurities through the lens of narrative fiction is, pretty relatable. It's also yet another story about finding a semblance of sense in the chaos and collective grief of quarantine, particularly anxiety over how the shock affects children. Divorced from the whole meta-commentary layer cake there are scenes that are profoundly moving in their smallness. The adorable little triplets holding a funeral for their dead mother, the terse heart-to-heart between Augie and Stanley, and of course, the utterly mesmerizing Margot Robbie cameo. The jury may still be out on the long-term social effects of the pandemic, but Asteroid City takes a strikingly optimistic view. The kids may not be all right, but they are far more adaptable than we give them credit for, and we could probably learn a thing or two from them. It's a theme that Anderson has been building upon since Rushmore, and Asteroid City represents the pinnacle of both his filmography and of the movies released in 2023.
I still don't understand the play.
Doesn't matter. Just keep telling the story.